Hi, this is Rabbi Chaim Kaufman. Welcome to our 186th installment in the Torah portion of the week. We are holding by Parshas Ekev. Parshas Ekev speaks about a lot of interesting topics. Speaks about the reward, right? Certainly for keeping Torah mitzvahs, the assurance we get. We speak about also the exodus from Egypt, tribulations in the wilderness, receiving the tablets, repeated rebelliousness. Also speaks about second portion of the Shema. Right? If I don't do God's will, I'm going to get punished. Right? It's about reward and punishment. So over there it says, verse 18, you shall place these words of mine upon your heart, upon your soul, bind them for a sign upon your arm, let them be an ornament, between your eyes. Right? You're going to bind them for a sign upon your arm, an ornament between your eyes, i.e. tefillin. Right? Phylacteries, tefillin, whatever you want to call them. That's what the verse is talking about. So it says, Mori v'Rebbe, Arav Agon Ramosher Moshlita, should be well. And he explains in Dam Vadas, his commentary on Chumash. And he says like this, he says that, what should I place on my heart? I should place words of Torah. Because what's the problem? Problem is, person's heart covets. Person's heart has desires. So you need extra guarding over here. So learning Torah, if I place it on my heart, then it should help me go against my desires. Now, if God forbids, your heart desires things and wants things that are forbidden, right? Obviously that's going to be a problem. He says, nonetheless, if I put words of Torah, in my heart, and I guard them, right? What's that going to do? It's going to guard me against, God forbids, going after bad desires. Because Torah essentially, as long as I'm learning it properly, Torah should be tremendous guarding. And it should stop me from going after base desires. They're going to say, isn't it true? The evil inclination never stops. True. Evil inclination come you this way, come that way, come a different way. We don't really care how the evil inclination comes. We have to do everything we can to beat it. Right? So therefore we have to try and control our hearts. How do you control your hearts? My Rebbe says over here, Torah. The more Torah you learn, the more it controls. Right? The more it's going to control your heart. So then my Rebbe says, in the name of the righteous Rav Menachem Mendel Mikotsk, i.e. the Kotzker Rebbe, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, blessed memory, Kotzker Rebbe said that, what does it mean? So he says it means over here, and he says it in almost like a joking way, right? But sorry, not a joking way, but like a clear way. He says, if I put words close to my heart, sometimes the heart's going to get inspired, the heart's going to get awakened, and it's going to open up, the words of Torah are going to open up and prepare the heart to accept it. Now, what do we say? What did the Torah say? Torah said, place it on your heart. Placing it on your heart, simple explanation is, if I'm going to learn Torah, I'm going to learn it to the best of my ability. I want to make sure it's on my heart. Because the heart desires, the heart covets. So therefore, Torah is going to offset that. And the more I learn Torah, and I understand the values, the less my desires are going to be. Doesn't mean the evil inclination stops. Right? It means I'm so into Torah, how can I think about these other things? So we say every day, my Rebbe here points out, we say every day in our prayers that God should open our hearts with His Torah and place on our hearts love of Him and fear of Him. Because the power of learning Torah is certainly the essence. But the purpose of it is what? Is to enter the heart. That is the purpose of learning Torah. Is to enter the heart. That a person should have love of God, fear of God. In order to help us reach our potential. And again, get to this love of God. Right? The love of God, fear of God, etc. So there are a number of points. I want to flesh out over here. And the first thing is, if a person is steeped in desire, right? It's very hard. Whatever a person's desire is, they continue it. Because it's hard. Once it's part of you, once you've already done it a number of times, it's very hard to break. You know, like any bad habit. Once you do it enough times, it's hard to break. But he says over here, he says the purpose of Torah, the Torah gives us an extra guarding. That even if, God forbid, we get trapped in our desires, Torah can push it off. So you're going to say, but our desires are very strong. Right, what does the Talmud tell me? You know, a person has a desire to do the wrong thing, God forbid. You take this desire, what do you do with it? You bring this desire, you bring it to the base medrash. Right, well, first thing is you say the Shema. That doesn't work. You bring it to the base medrash. You learn. Why? Because the power of learning, we're going to see, fights off these base desires. Because if a person's really into learning, in every spare second they learn, you know, when they're not working or, you know, whatever it is, so their mind's always focused on learning. So you ask me, okay, if my mind is really focused, and it's focused in learning, then how can it be possible for a person to go after his base desires? Right, because it's also brought down that a person only sins if his mind is free from Torah. So if a person constantly thinks in Torah, then his mind won't be free. And if a mind isn't free, he can't sin. And he won't sin. Because the only thing he's thinking about is Torah. So that's what he means over here. That the more a person learns, and he places it in his heart, that will break down, let's say better, that will break down a person's interest to go after bad desires. He won't have any interest. Too busy learning. Won't get distracted. Says the Kotzker Rebbe. Says the Kotzker Rebbe here that if he places Torah not in the heart, maybe he doesn't have to go that far. If he places it near the heart, sometimes the heart's going to awaken. The heart will open up in order that the words of Torah can be accepted. In other words, I don't need to do it direct. Maybe it's a harder process. Right? Maybe it's a harder process putting the Torah in one's heart. Because we always say there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect between the mind and the heart. The mind knows what to do. Knows what the right thing is. The heart steers them in the wrong direction. So the mind and the heart have to be in sync. Now, if the heart covets and desires, it's going to be harder. It's going to be a lot more difficult to penetrate. So says the Kotzker Rebbe, I don't need to put it straight in the heart. Then maybe that's too hard. Right? Maybe at the outset it's too hard. So what do? I put it nearby. If I put it nearby, then it's got the chance it's going to enter. Then it makes the heart the receptacle to be able to let the Torah in. If you hit it straight on, and you want that to go into your heart, sounds like it's going to be problematic. It's going to be too hard to do. So if I place it nearby, getting the heart ready, softening it up, so then when the heart's ready to accept it, it'll accept it. It'll be much easier because you're not hammering the heart. You're not going bam, bam, bam. It's on the outside. It creeps in. So when it creeps in, the heart's ready to take. Once the heart's ready to take, the Torah goes in. It's an easier process. Right? So explains the Kotzker Rebbe. Now, isn't it true, right, if a person has a desire and he's thrust in this desire, isn't it very hard even to think in Torah when you're caught up in the desire, whatever it is? Very true. But if a person's mind's always working, person's always thinking about a question, whatever he's learning, he's going through the different sides, what it means, or, he's walking somewhere, he's waiting for the bus, whatever it is. But he's thinking and learning, then this would answer up. You don't need, the heart will not desire. The heart will have no interest over here. Why not? Doesn't have time. Because the mind is flooding it with Torah thoughts. Bam, bam, bam. All these Torah thoughts. So when a person's constantly thinking in Torah, I'm not saying it's easy. But when a person's constantly thinking in Torah, your mind is only occupied with Torah. Right? Shabbos table should only speak words of Torah. Right? Shabbos may be different. Right? It's totally holy day, so you should only use it for holy things. Right? During the week also. If possible, we should only speak words of Torah. Not speak about mundane things. Even though mundane things may be fun. But if I train myself to do that, so wherever I am, waiting in line or whatever it is, so I'm not thinking about idle things. What am I thinking about? Thinking words of Torah. A person, is waiting, they can say Tehillim. They can say Psalms. Right? A person has to wait in line for something, or they're waiting for somebody. Right? They could come straight away. Right? That's Murphy's Law. You take out your Tehillim, take out your Psalms, or whatever. You start to say it, all of a sudden the person shows up. And if you don't, then what happens? The person doesn't come. Right? Murphy's Law. But what are you showing? You're showing you don't want to leave your mind idle. You don't need to talk about garbage, what's going on in the world. Who cares? You got to protect yourself, whatever. But a lot of things about elections, governments, it's irrelevant. Totally irrelevant to my life. A lot of things in social media, irrelevant. Fun, interesting, true, totally irrelevant. That means my mind is free. If I let my mind be free, even if I learn Torah, it's going to be much harder. It's going to be much, much harder. Because then other things enter. Once other things enter, it's not that easy for Torah to go in. Right? People will say, they're addicted to Candy Crush, they're addicted to video games, whatever. Because your mind is free from Torah. You gotta say, really? You gotta think in Torah 24/7? I want to take a break. I want to relax. So you gotta relax with something where your mind's gonna focus on Torah. Doesn't have to be as intense. Give me something less intense. But it should be thoughts of Torah. Because if it's not thoughts of Torah, your mind is idle. If your mind is idle, person can sin. A person can go after bad desires. The heart will win out. So what do? My language? You plug the heart with Torah. That's what you do. You plug it up with Torah and Torah thoughts. And Torah novella. That's what you want to do. And if you're able to do that, your mind is never idle. If your mind is never idle, I won't speak Lashon Hara against someone else. Right? I won't speak badly. I won't think about things that take me away from Torah. I won't think about things that may interest me that go against Torah. You say, come on, Torah, Torah goes that far? Torah's that intense? Very easy. It's very, very easy to get sucked in. It's much more difficult to focus on Torah. If a person's, gets into, sports, movies, other things, and they're addicted, it's very hard to fight this. It could be a lot more interesting. I don't have to think as hard. I can just watch. But the Torah doesn't go in. It makes it harder for the Torah to go in. Because the person's too into this other stuff. And when a person is into it, fighting it real hard. Doesn't mean a person doesn't set aside time to learn. I'm not saying he goes away from learning. But a person gets distracted. When a person gets distracted, it's harder to get into Torah. So when we say in our prayers, open our hearts so Torah can go in. That's the power of learning Torah. That the power of learning Torah is to open the heart. That's the power. And what does that lead to? One of the most important aspects of Torah. Fear from punishment, from sin, and love of God. Because we mentioned many times you need both. You need the fear of God, and you need love of God. That's the power of Torah. So we may not necessarily see it in physical terms, but if a person is lit up, they're addicted to learning. Can have that also. A good way and a bad way. Person can be addicted to learning. When a person's addicted to learning, that's their life. That is what they live for. That's the most important thing. Nothing else is important. You gotta work, gotta make a living, okay. When I'm not doing that, back to the books. Gonna help in your house. Also, okay, you gotta find a balance. But basically, around the clock, when you're not doing other things, i.e., for your family or for making a living, I got an obligation to learn. But a person has to prioritize. When a person learns, however much they learn, that time that they learn is like the Holy of Holies. Doesn't change. You don't let anything stop it. Unless it's something like, life's in danger or whatever. When a person's learning, they're locked in. But a person can also get distracted. With a lot of different things. So the idea here is the essence of my learning, the power of my learning to be focused, is to open up my heart. It is to take what I learn and I put it inside. When I fill up my heart with Torah, I get the fear of God. I get the love of God. If I learn and I fill up my mind with garbage, okay, I get merit for learning. But what about the garbage? Where does that go? The heart gets clouded. It gets the power of Torah to a certain extent, but it gets its other stuff. When it gets its other stuff, the heart gets stronger when it comes to desire, not for Torah. Because you're giving it at least equal billing. And if a person does that, Torah doesn't go in as easy. Why? Because they're subjected to what they see. A person can have all the desires in the world, be a big Talmud Chacham, be a big rabbinic scholar, want to raise themselves to higher spiritual levels. But if you don't fill your heart with Torah, your heart can destroy. Esav's head, when he was killed, was rolled into the cave of the patriarchs, not his body. Why not? His head knew what the right thing was. Right? It's brought down that he was just as great in learning, if not better, than Yaakov. But what happened? His base desires killed him. So his body didn't have the merit to be buried in the cave of the patriarchs. His head did. His head was in the right place. Problem is, his body took him away. Body led him astray. So if a person really understood the power of Torah, what it can do, and how it can affect my life. Say, listen, I'm caught up in this, I'm caught up in that. So when you have a desire to do that, open up a book. Watch a video. Right? Watch a Torah video. Fill it with something good, not something bad. When I do that, it pushes out the bad, it makes the good stronger. But don't think for 1 second the evil inclination is going to say, okay, I'm just going to sit back, not going to do anything. The evil inclination is going to fight back. Cause your mind to wander from who knows what. Interesting things, fun things. And then the Torah gets weakened. So there's always this struggle. But the point here is, if my mind is constantly going in the ways of Torah, in the thoughts of Torah, if that is the case, how is it going to be that I let my heart free? That I go after desires? I don't have time. Too busy learning. Too busy reviewing. Right? Too busy trying to acquire my Torah in this world. So if I'm that busy doing it, around the clock, different times, this, that, how do I have time to learn? How do I have time to do other things? How do I have time to let my heart take a hold of me and let the negative things in? And the reason is, we're not focused. We may have certain times we learn. Now let's say a person learns for 2 hours. How much of that 2 hours is really focused in learning? Not where your mind was thinking other things. Politics, whatever. I'm not talking about when you're not learning. There's an evil inclination even when you learn. Phone rings. Somebody needs something. Other things. So a person can get distracted even when learning. So you can say, Rabbi, that's great. Really powerful. How do you not get distracted? So I would tell you like this. Wherever you're going to learn. Let's say you're in your house, apartment, whatever. And you have, before you have to do anything, you have an hour. Let's say. You have an hour and a half. That amount of time, whenever it is during the day, hopefully it's the same time every day, but whatever it is, that time you have to be focused. You have to zone in. So that means, unless you're watching, let's say, Torah videos on your computer, whatever, I would say you shut down the computer. Shut down your phone. Right? Someone wants to get a hold of you, they'll leave a message. But for that hour and a half, it's between you and God. And unless, like, the house is about to be burnt down, you don't leave. That's intensity. That means there's less likely a chance that person is going to get distracted. Now, you tell me it's not so easy. I didn't say it was easy. Right? I'm giving advice of how to stay focused. And if you don't stay focused, even when you're learning, your mind is elsewhere. And if your mind is elsewhere, the learning doesn't go in. It's much, much more difficult. A person gets distracted. And it's easy to get distracted. Because a lot of things can distract us. But a person has that time. You say, this is the time I'm not going to get distracted. The evil inclination says, really? I'm going to get you distracted. You say, no, you're not. He says, yes, I am. You have to work hard. Tremendously hard. Whatever that amount of time is, that is holy. That is like the Holy of Holies. And I do whatever I can to uphold it. It doesn't matter the amount of time. Let's say we have 20 minutes. You have half an hour. So on that time, out of mind, out of sight. I'm in God's world now. God's the one dictating whatever I'm learning. Everything else, I don't care. Irrelevant. I am now totally focused. So that means you have to be like in your own island. You got to just shut everything off. I mean, obviously, unless you're using it to learn. But essentially, you have to shut it off. Because if you don't shut it off, you'll get distracted. You ever see pictures of people that got phones in their hand? And their faces in the phone? Like all the time? God forbid, just got another message. Someone else posted something. Something else. Got to see the news every 30 seconds. It's 100% a walking distraction. Walking distraction. Sitting distraction. Right? Not really the topic, for now. But we can't get distracted. We have to stay focused. If you don't stay focused, the learning won't go in. And if you don't constantly think in Torah about something you heard, something you learned, whatever, and you think about it more, your mind has to be filled with Torah. Because if it's not going to be filled with Torah, it's going to be filled with something else. That other stuff is going to be garbage. And then it's going to go to your heart, and then your heart's going to desire, your heart's going to want. So you might think, okay, he's talking a very high level here. I'm not really speaking about a high level. And I'm not saying this is only for the righteous. This is for everybody. Anybody who learns. Men, women. We live in a very, very distracting world. And we made it that way. Okay, this is the world we live in. So the question is, am I going to let it overcome me? Am I going to let it control me? Or am I going to control it? So a person could say, you know what? You're 100% right. But that world is really, really strong. Okay? I didn't say it wasn't. But we don't understand the world of Torah. There are great people, that would learn hours at a time standing up. And they didn't see people around them. They were totally focused. To the extent that, no one else existed. There still are people like that today. You stand right next to them, they don't even know you're there. Because they're just so in tune. They're engrossed in learning. Well, they'll make a big distinction. Imagine someone's reading a mystery novel, and they're so into it. You ask them something, whatever, they don't answer. Say, oh, by the way, the house is burning down. I know, I'll get to it later. And then 5 minutes later, did you just say the house is burning down? Right? All the more so with Torah. If a person's really in tune, the person's really focused, how can you get distracted? So what if someone walked in the room? You want to see who it is? Who cares? Especially in the middle of prayer. Who cares who it is? Where should I be right now? My focus has to be on prayer. My focus has to be on learning. What do I care about anything else? Everything else, right now, at this stage, is all background noise. And I have to shut off the background noise. Because if I don't shut off the background noise, I get distracted very easily. When you get distracted very easily, it's hard to learn. It's hard to focus no matter how much time you have. So you say, Rabbi, great, this is great Musar. This is a great idea of ethics. But I would tell people that whenever a person learns for however long, that amount of time is like the Holy of Holies. And during that time, I don't care about anything else. And that amount of time doesn't matter how much it is. I'm tuned in. I'm super focused. I'm looking at the text. I'm watching, a video. I'm, a Torah video. I'm engrossed in what I'm learning. I'm not thinking about anything else. Because nothing else at that point matters. It's my connection to the Eibishter. My connection to God. And if my connection to God is so important, why are you thinking about other things? Well, they're fun. They're interesting. Yeah, but I'm learning Torah now. Torah's also fun and interesting. If you have the right people giving it over. If you know how to learn, you're learning with someone else. It can also be extremely interesting. But you got to be focused. And if a person loses that focus, the learning doesn't go. A person can be there, learn with someone, let's say for an hour and a half, and they really only learn for 20 minutes. The other hour and 10 minutes, they were schmoozing, talking about other things. They get back to the topic, go back to something else. They don't end up learning for that amount of time. I'm not saying the conversation is not interesting. But it's not focused. And when you lose focus, you lose Torah. Torah doesn't stick. When you're focused, you review, you're engrossed. You understand, to a certain extent what you're doing, what your goals are. Different story altogether. But if you let anything get to you or get distracted, the heart will covet. The heart will be open for things that it should not be open for. And you say it'll be open anyway to a certain extent because the evil Kodesh won't let it shut. Well, that's not necessarily true. There are certain people, great people, you can't speak to them about politics. You can't speak to them about sporting events. You can't speak to them about movies, about other things. It only has to be about Torah. And if you try to, they'll probably, push the conversation a different way. As they should. Because what am I here in the world for? I'm only here for a certain amount of time. And I want the most amount of time I can maximize to be focused on Torah. Because if it's not focused on Torah, then I don't get the fear of heaven. I don't get the love of God. Or fear. What I get is someone who's subjected to their base desires, even if they're learning Torah. So I want to remind everyone I have a class on duties of the heart every Tuesday night, 9 o'clock New York time. Speaking about humility, 10 ways to acquire humility. I also have a class on the book of Leviticus every Sunday, 9 o'clock New York time. Do Tanakh Talk every Monday, doing Proofs for God, 2 o'clock Eastern time, 9 o'clock Israel time. I have 2 Q&As every Tuesday, Thursday, 10 o'clock in the morning New York time, 5 o'clock Israel time. And I have classes on, for the sake of conversion. Anyone has any questions on any of that, you can find me on Facebook, Beyond Orthodox Conversion and Judaism. You can send me an email. RabbiChaimKoffman@gmail.com. RabbiChaimKoffman @gmail.com.